Welcome to the Magnify the Middle podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Moore, with my fellow host, Elizabeth Kazenko. And today we have a special guest with us, Phil Jackson. So today's podcast is all about the why. We're going to Simon Sinek this episode, and we're going to give you the why behind why we wanted to do Magnify the Middle and kind of what the podcast is all about. But Elizabeth, you said you like to start all of your podcasts with a question. So what is the big question you want to ask everybody?
Yeah, so I want to start off a little fun. So you think back at your previous experience, either yourself or just, as a manager yourself, what's one of the most eye-opening experiences you've had in middle management?
I would say early on in my career, my first opportunity to manage people, I had an intern that was working for me, and I was like training him up. He was very, very bright, very intelligent, but he made some mistakes early on, and I had no real training, so I was like, I'll just make excuses for him, kind of sweep it under the rug. I didn't really address it. I'm like, he's really sharp. He's just moving too quickly. He's gonna be all right. And then as time went on, it continued, kind of got worse, and then in kind of poor management fashion, I let him go without really explaining the situation. Like, he had no idea. He was kind of blindsided by it.
Bad breakup.
It was no
sixth grade. Did you leave a note that was just like?
I didn't text him, which was better.
But
it was
best friend
as
to do it?
close to
You
that
sent him
as
an
possible. I did take someone else in the room with me to do it. It was really awkward. Just made a real mess of it. But then what happened was we ended up having a big turnover on my team, and we were in just really kind of a desperate situation, and I need anyone who could possibly do the job. And he was the only name that I could think of. And so I had to fall on the sword. I still remember I met him at a Bob Evans for lunch, right? Just to say, hey, any interest in coming back to work for me on my team?
Yeah, I know I fired you for no reason. I'm a terrible manager, but when you come back.
Remember how surprised and shocked you were when I let you go a couple months ago? Just kidding. I really need you to come back. He did agree to it, but I did learn a little bit from that initial mistake, and I was much more clear to him, this is what I need from you, and this is what I expect in terms of how you're going to execute it. And to his credit, he performed phenomenally. He did an excellent job in that, return role in his comeback tour. He did a great job.
How about you, Jeff?
So the story I was thinking of, I was in charge of the IT department, but I had a manager above me, and the manager above me came and told me one day that my department, the physical layout space, was going to get, what do they call it, eminent domain. Essentially, the larger corporation was going to come in and they were going to take some of our space, and that I had no recourse and that I had to make do. Okay. It's like, okay. I was like, are you sure? Is this absolutely? Yes, this is absolutely. So, okay. So we're going to get some new cube configuration or office layout. So we got these standing desks, which were pretty cool. No one else in the organization had standing desks. And I thought it would be clearly explained to the rest of the organization that the reason we had the standing desks is because they were a smaller footprint. It would just work, and kind of an extra bonus for everyone taking on this smaller space.
So you guys were smashed in there, desk to desk to desk.
Yeah, it was desk to desk to desk. So really not an ideal situation. So to kind of mitigate it, we added the standing feature. But I guess there was some kind of office jealousy, and people were asking all these questions. And I thought that my manager would kind of explain to other team members why, or within the organization, and that didn't happen. And so it was kind of a lesson to me. It's even when you're in the middle, you have to kind of negotiate both, and don't just assume your boss is going to tell the story that needs to be told. You might have to tell the story yourself, or go outside of them. So that was kind of my eye-opening experience.
Okay. So mine was actually my first day on the job here. I came in, I was all excited to meet my team, and I met with my boss, and she gave me kind of the rundown orientation. Here's what I want you to hit. Here's your projects. And I'm going to go meet the team, learn the systems. And I looked down the list, and it says, talk to manager about how they're not going to have any direct reports anymore, and you're going to take them over because this manager is not doing a good job. So I said, you want me to go meet this manager for the first time and say, by the way, I'm going to demote you today?
I've never evaluated your performance.
I don't know you at all, but I'm going to go ahead and take your direct report. So I was really stuck in a hard spot because I wanted to make a good impression on my leader, on my boss, that I could handle whatever challenges she was presenting me with. But on the other hand, I also wanted to make a good impression on my team and not, upset them on day one and kind of take over their job in the process. So yeah, that was a tough one for me to navigate.
So I think those are three good examples or stories of like, it can just be tough being in the middle, right? You got somebody above you, you got your team below you. It can be a challenge. So I think we're going to move into like, we face this problem and we think we have some ideas around it, but like, what else is the problem statement as you thought it? Because you've really thought about this probably more than anybody, Elizabeth. Like, when you think of this problem, how would you frame out the problem?
Yeah, so in my role, I oversee the finance side of the company, but also the human resource side. And with that, we get to execute on a lot of employee surveys, engagement surveys. And we got a lot of consistent feedback from staff, really, on, hey, can we do some manager training? And I thought, if staff are asking for manager training, there's definitely a gap in there. And then on the executive team side, we're also getting the same feedback. Hey, we need to do some training in this organization for our managers just to help them along. And I think where this comes from, especially mid-level companies where we don't have very robust development departments, to be able to bring in a lot of resources, is you hire a lot of player coaches. You hire a lot of very technical people, and when they become really good at their technical skills, they get promoted to manager, to be the technical manager of their department.
To be clear, my team calls it getting demoted to manager.
As they would. That checks out. Yeah, so we knew we needed to implement some training, but how do you go about that?
Yeah, so that's the next question, right? So I think you had a couple lessons along the way, or a couple attempts, and maybe didn't get it right the first try.
Yeah, first, second, maybe third try.
Yeah.
It's hard. So the first thing that I remember happening before I was in this role is some of our senior leaders put together some training themselves. It takes a lot of time. It really does, to do a lot of research, put together a training to pull everybody in to come listen to you. It was good. It was a good, effective training, I thought. But once you're done, that's kind of a point in time training. And then you could repeat it maybe once a year, catch the new people. But it just wasn't very effective. It wasn't a very good, consistent training program.
Yeah, as I've been thinking about some of your comments around this, I read this quote recently. It was saying, everyone always talks about how many books they read, right? Like, I read 50 books this year. I read a bazillion books this year. But somebody said, it's not how many books you read, it's how many books you implement. And it's kind of the same thing, right? We're just peppering these people with training, and they're not getting a chance to like do exercises or like practice, right? So there's
and it's just not consistent, and like it doesn't occur very frequently. So the second thing that I tried is pulling in someone from the outside. So there's companies that do this. So you can hire people to come in and do some management training, and that was
the experts.
Major flaw.
Exactly.
So why? Well, for one thing, it's very expensive. So budget wise, that was an eye-opening experience for me. But the second thing is, when you're a smaller company, a mid-level company, culture is very important to you. And the training needs to be unique, because we have very unique jobs and very unique needs here, because we are, a mid-level, smaller company. So you bring someone in from the outside, and we tried 2 or 3 different people to do this, and each time it just missed the mark. Even with prep meetings, even with like little trials, small group meetings ahead of time, it just missed the mark every time. It was not good. So I thought, all right, well, we know our culture. We can bring this back in-house, but how do we do that in a way that isn't like spend 3 months preparing, do one training, and then it sits on the shelf and, dust it off and bring it back once a year? And, Jeff, I think about you. You're very well-read. In our senior team meetings, you're often coming in talking about this book that you read. And as I look around our senior leadership, we have a lot of very unique skill sets, and each person brings something different to the table. So I thought, instead of trying to do a very large formal program, why don't we just sprinkle in all of these different aspects of each person's unique abilities that they have from a leadership standpoint. So that's what we started last year. Phil's part of that group as well. We started a study group.
Okay.
With our middle managers. So we aimed at beginnings, your first time managing somebody, to about like your 3 to 4 years in to managing people, and put a smaller group together. The whole plan was to have maybe no more than 10 to 12. We want to keep the group size small enough that it feels intimate enough. And then each time we bring in a person to share what is their unique perspective, what is their experience, and what can they bring to the group.
But not necessarily every time, right? So you kind of mixed it up. Is every session somebody from the outside coming in, or do you have some where it's just a chance for the managers to talk to?
Yeah, so good question. So we're about a year and a couple months into it, and we've had somebody come in each time for about the first 12 sessions.
Okay.
And we've kind of gotten through all of that prepared content that we wanted to get through. And now what we're going to do is every other session, we're going to bring in a guest to go through prepared content. And then in the in-between, it's just the managers talking.
So maybe we'll switch gears to Phil for a second. So you've been part of this study program. Maybe kind of give us a before and after. So where do you feel like you were at sort of before? And then, as you've participated in this, how has this changed either your management style or your effectiveness with your team? How would you?
Excellent. I think first, even just from my perspective, even hearing that there was going to be some kind of a program, it was encouraging that they see us. But then that's balanced with a fear of oh gosh, what kind of formal program is this going to be that I don't really want to
How much
do?
time is this?
I was like, they're going to give me max homework and things. I'm like, I got plenty of things to do. I just need help doing it better. And so it was refreshing to have it in that study group format, because I think a formal training and a program, it's not that it wouldn't have been helpful. There could have been some good nuggets in there. But the reality of the situation is it's a one point in time thing. I'd show up, I'd write down some good notes, but then I'd go back to my stressful day-to-day operation, and I wouldn't implement or do anything with it. So it was encouraging to hear the format. That number one, they saw us, but I think the format was that's something I can actually engage regularly.
Yeah, and so you had a cohort, right? So it's not just these people coming in. Now you got this. And I don't know, you're a relationship guy, so I feel like you probably had pretty good relationships before, but was it easier just knowing oh, hey, we're in this group together, we can maybe talk about some sensitive issues? Or
Yes. I think that was even to answer your kind of original question, Jeff, is before we had the study group, there was just a feeling of kind of being on an island of there's things that I felt like I was doing that come natural to me. I'm good at this aspect of managing the team. But there's aspects that I knew I wasn't good at. For every one that I thought I was good at, there's probably two that I was not good at, ill prepared, under resourced and educated on my own doing, right? Yeah. But I think feeling that way, but I don't know what else to do. I'm gonna just lean into the parts that I'm good at and try not to make too big of a mess out of the ones I'm not good at, and see if we can't keep this thing afloat. But going into kind of the study group format, like you said, I'm a relationship guy. It was I know these folks, but it was really helpful just to hear oh, I'm not alone. Other people have it is hard, but I think it was validating to know at the company level that the middle management, it's a hard spot to be in, but it's very necessary and can kind of drive big results if you harness it well. And I think knowing that was the case, and that I'm they want to invest in us, and not just a token, here's a management training program investment, but let's help you do this better. And what do you guys need help with? What do you asking us for that feedback of what conversations are hard? What do you feel like you need to be better managers? And I think because it was a smaller, intimate group, we could learn from one another. We felt freedom to actually say, hey, this is what we need help with. And we can learn from one another's specific experiences and say hey, avoid this. Listen, I tried this. Don't do that. It didn't go well. I don't know if I have the silver bullet, but I know what to avoid.
Yeah, I think too, Elizabeth talked about the trainer, right? And the ability to know culture, because there's some things that are very culturally specific. Yes. Something that you could read in a book that totally makes sense. You think you should try it. Yeah. And if you talk to one of your friends, they'd be yo, do not do that in front of so-and-so. That's not going to work. Or what so-and-so really likes, lead in. If you're going to present to them, make sure you do X, Y, Z first.
And just understanding why we make some of the decisions we make. It's unique to this group. They all have that same question. And that's not something someone from the outside is going to be able to answer for us. Mm-hmm. And I think what's unique about this group is, Phil, you nailed it. You guys are all on your own little islands because you're all in your own unique departments. But and some people in this group, Jeff, never knew each other. They don't work together. So you bring everybody together, and what we found was they almost instantly had this commonality between them of, I'm in my own little island, but we all share the same concerns, problems, issues, successes to celebrate, and it kind of created this instant safe environment for them to share and just kind of brainstorm. So as I mentioned, we had prepared content, but we only planned on half of the session going through the prepared content, and we leave the other half of the session open for discussion. And maybe Phil will say, you know what, I did have this issue on my team. This is what I struggle with. Has anybody else experienced this? And what worked for you? And then they just kind of go and discuss amongst each other.
I'd be curious to see even a lot of good discussion in the study group sessions, but I wonder how many side conversations amongst the folks in that room happened afterwards as a result of our actual content sessions that just kind of spilled over. And then secondly, I think even just putting that group in the room, how many other, company issues or challenges that were faced maybe got hashed out sooner because there was better relationships among those middle managers sorting through those challenges and getting things done. Because I feel like I'm a relationships guy, so I knew many of the folks in there, but even those that I didn't know well, I feel like I know them better. And so I don't hesitate to pick up the phone to call them if hey, I'm having an issue that ties to their area. And I think that's some benefit of the study group that probably isn't being captured, but I think is very real.
Yeah, because you guys have to collaborate with each other, right, from time to time. And it's much harder to get angry or treat somebody poorly if they're your buddy from this other thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it really brought one voice to that whole management team. Instead of, Jeff, if we set the tone at the top and then we assume it sprinkles down into our individual departments in that same tone, we're kind of fooling ourselves on that one.
Classic game of telephone situation there.
Yeah. Classic telephone.
So we kept thinking the same message was getting passed along to all the managers, and I quickly found out through this process that that is definitely not the case. And we just all have different personalities and different communication styles. So at least pulling us all together, there's one common voice and communication being shared.
Awesome. Did you have something else you were going to say?
And I think that's helpful in some of those tough conversations, whether it's year-end reviews, compensation items, right? Not knowing if we're all singing from the same songbook. It's I told my team with confidence X, Y, Z, and then I come to find out, they talked to their friend whose manager told them, and it's just a real mess. And so I think it has helped to feel like we are a unified front, and I have clarity on what the message is, and then I can confidently deliver it, which is new and refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jeff, really, that's been what we've tried about a year and a half ago, and to my surprise, Phil, I really did expect the same thing that you thought from the beginning, is this would be seen as a time suck and a burden. And I thought, well, maybe we can just get through our prepared content, and then I can start over with a new class. Yeah. And instead, you guys said, hey, can we just keep this going? Oh, just keep it rolling, because you really enjoyed that time together. And the discussions, we run out of time every time.
And you do provide free lunch.
That's true.
And let's be fair.
Free food.
Let's be fair.
That is true, but I tell you this, there's not many, I have a variety of calendar blocks, and that's an hour-and-a-half calendar block, and there's not many of them that I want to attend. I say that one I actually look forward to it, and so when we discuss it, I'm not surprised that everyone's yes, we're in for it again, and I think we'd be in even if it didn't catch the lunch window, I think. Mm-hmm. But I guess I wrote even my notes today thinking there's not many hour-and-a-half calendar blocks that I have that I'm looking forward to, or that I would be sad if they went away. But this is one that I think has been a very good use of time.
All right, so the next topic we want to talk about, we kind of talked about the sort of the problem, possible solution, at least a solution we found that was pretty helpful for us. But the other thing in part of our kind of why is we want to frame out why we think middle management is so difficult and why it needs help. And the first is, it has a negative connotation. Why do we think there's this negative connotation around being a middle manager?
It does. I think that, first of all, look at any leadership book. It's all aimed right at the top, right? And so middle management tends to have this connotation that you're just a stepping stone until you've made it that third or fourth step into leadership. So it's sort of the middle ground. You're working your way there, but you're not there yet. I think that's kind of the stigma that middle management gets.
Yeah, and if you land there for too long, it's like, well, you didn't quite have what it takes to make it to the next level, but you're like pretty good at the day-to-day functions, so they got to have something else for you. So you just kind of like coast by in the middle in some fashion.
And I think that's really a disservice to people that are working in that role, because I think one of the things we found out through COVID is, top layer executives, they're really not as effective, or that we found is middle managers were really the ones that people were connecting with. They were finding their sense of purpose through. They were the reason people were coming in. It wasn't the executive setting some high level direction. It was the person kind of in the trenches with them, getting them through their day.
Yeah. And I mean, I can say from my perspective too, I relied so heavily during COVID on middle management to help me know what was going on in the organization. How are the staff doing? Are they feeling productive? Are they feeling, still connected to the organization? Is anybody lost and, needs some help? And it was really that middle management level that kept everything running. And what were they doing too is reporting all that information up and carrying the message from us back and forth. So they probably worked harder than anyone during that time period.
Yeah, it does. And I think in some ways it is the hard part of that middle management of communicating both directions. But I think if you weren't good at it, it actually shined a light on that it's necessity to make sure you're doing both. Because you either had poor communication down, it kind of helped shore that up, or at least shine a light on it, or up. Most likely, I think most times it's harder to communicate up in that middle management, or you're not used to it. And so
I think that's interesting that you say that it's harder communicating up, because when Elizabeth and I were preparing for this, one of the things we kept coming across is all of the material is geared towards down. Like all the books you read, it's how to be the leader, how to like push stuff down, how to get people to follow you, how to do this. Not a lot is really talked about in terms of how are you a good follower too? How do you report up? How do you communicate well with those above you? And how do you act as that bridge, not just down?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So you had sent me an article from the Harvard Business Review that talks about the concept of followership. And they point out the same thing is you also have to train managers on how to, build that relationship upwards with senior leadership as well as downwards, and really be that go-between. So it's really, you're teaching them how to be connectors, if you will, between all levels of the organization. And that's a different skill set. It's hard.
Yeah, and I think we're going to explore that some more in some future podcasts for sure.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that's definitely a topic worth exploring further, because I think especially a lot of the middle managers go from that like player coach role and even transitioning to just primarily coach. It's hard to let go of being the doer, right? And so that
will also be a whole separate episode.
You also like identify more with the doers. So I know my personal experience has been, when working like on my followership, it's either I tend to swing hard one way or the other too much, right? So I'm either like all in following and trying to be the yes man for my leader, right, to accomplish his or her objectives, or I'm like, no, I identify with my team and I'm like opposed to everything that comes from above, right? And so like neither are effective and they're exhausting in their own right, because if you're just doing the yes man over here, like the team is like, why is this guy he was one of us and now he's doing X, Y, Z. I think the grind of that like successful middle managers is the connection with both, and more that middle ground and trying to like hold the tension on both sides, which is quite challenging.
So how would you describe your style? Like how do you personally navigate that?
I think learning from doing it poorly on both sides, I think I'm a relationship guy, so building relationship with the leader, whoever's above me, and understanding what kind of how they like to work, and kind of feeding into that and helping show like, hey, I want to help you with your goals, but also, and then leveraging my relationship with the team when I have to deliver something that they don't necessarily want, but also then leaning into the relationship with my leader when I'm like, listen, the day-to-day function looks like this, and that's just not going to work, and choosing my spots to push back. It can't be a pushback every time, but also I guess setting the expectation that, listen, I'm not going to yes man it every time either. If I don't think it's going to work, I'm going to let you know it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. But come prepared with the rationale of why we're not doing it because I don't want to, right? Like that's not an explanation. But for me, it's a leverage the relationship, and it's like put some wins on the board on both sides, and then cash in those chips as needed when I have to push back.
All right, last question for you in the podcast. What is your big lesson from 2022?
Go ahead, Phil.
I would say maybe not even 2022, but just in my experience as a manager, I think some key lessons. The first one is like, don't, I guess, forget the basics. And the basics are just like, make sure they're like, be real clear about what success looks like in the role. I've shared a story earlier, like I did clarify that. So it's like being clear on what success looks like, give them a track to run on. And the second is making sure they have what they need to be successful. And then the third one being just make sure to celebrate when they celebrate and recognize good performance. Like don't hide it, just don't like take it for granted, celebrate. And then the last one I found you can get a lot of mileage out of just demonstrating that you actually care. And that doesn't mean I do what they want every single time. They know that that's not the case. But I think one thing that's been a big win recently is my team doesn't question whether or not I care, but that allows me the bandwidth to ask them for things that are hard and that they may not like because they know that I actually care. And then I guess the second thing that's kind of like an overarching thing that I've learned is really like it takes time to like invest in people and to manage well. And in the past, I have kind of minimized that to like do day-to-day tasks and to like hit the checklist. But I feel like I'm seeing more and more the value and it's worth it to invest that time. But I think that's also the grind of middle management is you've got both. But I've not been disappointed with the amount of time I've invested in like, I guess, building into my team, getting to know them, and like investing in that actual management piece, which I've never done before. And I think that's been a huge win this year.
Awesome.
For me, just speaking to the lessons I've learned since starting the study group, a couple things. One, just how important it is to connect with people. I've found that to be one of the two biggest themes I've really picked up out of this group is once you've established that connection, like you said, Phil, that you care for your team member, it really opens that door. And once you've opened that door, then you can really just start facilitating a lot of development on your team. The other thing that I really learned through these discussions is how much time we spend talking about that fellowship, talking about how to work with your leader and how to bridge that gap between your staff and your leader. And I've really noticed how important a healthy mindset of middle management is so important to a healthy organization. So when that is missing, it's like having a broken rung on a ladder. So if you have maybe a disengaged manager, maybe the connection between the manager and their leader isn't as strong as it should be, or maybe their connection between that leader and their employees isn't as strong as it should be, and the whole thing breaks. So I've noticed a larger theme where we're having organizational issues where you can hone in on there's something broken in that chain between the employee, the manager, and the leader on the overall healthy mindset.
And it is good to think of it like a chain, right? And if one of it breaks, then everything below it breaks. It's
Right.
it's very hard for anything below it to work if
Right.
it breaks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about you?
Oh man, my 2022. I would say for me, the 2022 lesson is communication. Just making sure you think you're communicate again, and then probably do it 2 more times just to
Yeah.
make sure everyone gets the message. And I would also say doing things like this and not being afraid to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
I've been surprised at just what happens in life when you put yourself out there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a wrap for the first episode of the Magnify the Middle podcast. I'm Jeff Moore, special guest Phil Jackson, Elizabeth Kazenko, and we will see you next time.